How are speedrunners able to turn a platformer with incredibly hard levels into this? Basically defying the laws of physics and completely using the game's mechanics to its full potential. From spike jumps, extended hyper dashes, infinite wall climbs, to literally going through the walls and abusing the speed momentum. Welcome to Celeste. I honestly think this is one of the best speedrunning games ever created, and to properly show you that and how ridiculous it actually gets, I learned how to run the game myself. Celeste is in essence pretty simple. You are playing as Madeline. She is this cute girl trying to climb a mountain. There's a very beautiful story attached about anxiety, overcoming fears, grief, but I cannot do it justice in this video. I am mainly going to focus on the gameplay itself. Starting in the prologue, you are introduced to its core platforming mechanics. You can walk and jump, just like in any other platformer, but you can also climb walls by holding a button. However, this will deplete your stamina, so you cannot hold on forever. Then at the end of prologue, we learn how to use the dash, which just propels you forward in a single direction. Closing that out, we're now moving on to the first level. Chapter 1, Forsaken City. You learn to utilize these controls properly, and we discover different kinds of platforms. The ones that break, the ones that move, and the ones that fall when you touch them, the ones that make you jump, and the ones that kill you. We also come across this crystal. This basically gives you your dash back in mid-air, because whenever you use your dash, your hair will turn blue and it will only reset once you touch the ground again or get one of these crystals. This chapter obviously is not too difficult, it just helps you get familiar with the controls, which to me was definitely a bit of a learning experience. On my first playthrough, I finished this level in about 15 minutes, while speedrunners can do this within a minute. Chapter 2 is the old site. Right away we find these cosmic looking blocks that we can't really interact with. Moving along through this level, they're just everywhere, blocking some of the entrances. And after navigating through some of these rooms, we find a mirror. And now we will meet evil Madeline. As she escapes, the cosmic blocks activate and we can dash straight through them, which is basically the whole gimmick of this entire level. Later on, we get chased by this evil Madeline, and if she catches us, we just die. So this was actually one of the more stressful parts of the game, especially since this is also when you get introduced to doors. I mean, they're not really doors, but they open up if you grab all of these blue switches in a room. The chase goes on, meanwhile we're opening more doors, and then we get to a peaceful ending, which teleports you back to the start of the level, where you just find out that all of this was a dream, and now those special blocks are removed. This final part, however, is just a stroll to the park, and with that we are done with chapter 2 in 21 minutes and 30 seconds. Chapter 3, the Celestial Resort. We start on a long bridge with all of this red stuff covering it, which, yes, will kill you. Apparently it can also move. People are calling these dust bunnies. Now, the entrance to this resort is locked, and for that we have to find a key. Now, those are just the main mechanics for this first chapter. Dust bunnies and keys. The entire story behind this level is that the owner is a ghost and the place is incredibly messy, so we take it upon ourselves to clean everything. This level was actually quite tricky and it took me about 40 minutes to finish. It's just a bunch of rooms filled with spikes and dust bunnies going back and forth to clean up the resort. And for runners, there are some insane skips in here. Then it just ends in a chase where the owner loses his shit and attacks you while you are running for your life trying to escape the place. That pretty much sums up resorts. Chapter 4, we arrive at the Golden Ridge, where the spikes turn blue. A beautiful, calm level with bouncy clouds, bubbles that you can fire in any direction, but also the most annoying mechanic in the game, wind. I don't think I need to explain how wind works. There's also some blocks that move in a certain direction when touched, even some that you can move around yourself. So this level is just a collection of using bubbles and clouds, figuring out rooms with moving platforms almost like a puzzle, and the struggle of dealing with the fucking wind. Runners are also doing some crazy skips that just look like CGI. Anyway, this took me about 43 minutes. Chapter 5 is the Mirror Temple, which we enter with our buddy Theo. Now he has just been a side character in the story, popping up from time to time. In this temple, things just turned red. Now the spikes are red and bubbles are back, but they don't pop instantly. We also find these platforms that move whenever you dash. And instead of locks and keys, we now mostly have pillars and buttons. This level is mainly a maze of flying red bubbles from room to room, but in runs, obviously, these can just be skipped. We then see another mirror which just gives us a major flashback, but this time our buddy Theo is on the other side. So we're just gonna go through more of the maze, eventually finding another bigger mirror that just sucks us up to the other side. Now things are gonna get a little bit weird, but stay with me. We turned into a flying monster and kill ourselves and then spawn on the dark side and meet up with evil Madeline again. And we're now plagued with all of these annoying monsters that constantly charge at us. These rooms were honestly pretty difficult and hard to navigate sometimes, but we then find Theo locked in a cage and have to carry his ass across multiple more difficult rooms, eventually coming eye to eye with an eye. That's the joke. We hit it, escape, and the level is done in 1 hour and 16 minutes. There's only 2 more chapters left. So chapter 6 is Reflection, where we discover that we can fly. All we have to do is grab one of these golden feathers. But then evil Madeline shows up, gets angry again, and undoes all our progress, putting us back at the bottom of the mountain. Now the spikes turned pink, and there's a whole bunch of water for us to swim in. Down here, we get to meet Kevin, a block that you can hit from any side, and they will launch themselves in that direction, causing absolute destruction. Lastly, there's also these things. I don't really know what or who they are, but when you touch them, they will launch you in that direction. This level is mainly just climbing back up using all 3 of these new mechanics until we meet evil Madeline again. She gets angry again, and now it gets nasty. She's gonna fire projectiles and laser beams, and this time we actually fight back as well. In the end, they make up, become friends, and now we have pink hair. This means that we have 2 dashes that now we can use. After 50 minutes, it is time to enter the last chapter. The Summit. This is a combination of all previous levels, but now obviously made harder because you do have that double dash. Evil Madeline throws us up first to a rework of the Forsaken City, but now with more spikes. Then we fly up to Old Side, also with more spikes. This trend continues for the other chapters. Nothing new, but really difficult. Once we are done with these levels, we still have to reach the summit. There are 30 checkpoints that are scattered across the mountain. No new mechanics here, just some parkour, lots of dying, and then the final checkpoints are in sight. We have now finally reached the summit. Time to start learning about the speedrun. Celeste has a huge community that is still super active. The world record for any percent literally changed while I was learning about this game. It is currently sitting at 26 minutes and it looks like absolute magic. Like, what am I watching? How is this possible? So I began my practice with completing some of the harder levels in Celeste first, because even though we technically already reached the summit, there is a lot more to be done. For example, in each level you can find a cassette, which unlocks the B-side of a chapter, which is just a much harder version of the original. Then you also have C-sides, you have the Crystal Core, the Farewell DLC, but with all of that out of the way, let's actually start running. In Prologue, it is all just about well-timed jumps and skipping cutscenes, pretty basic stuff. But then in chapter 1, when we have our dash unlocked, we can finally start moving in ridiculous ways. In Celeste, you actually have a lot of different jumps that you don't necessarily need to complete the game, and they're complicated at first, but they are the fundamentals of the speedrun. This is what the normal jump and the normal dash looks like. Then you also have a super dash, which propels you a little faster and further. And then you have the hyper dash, which is even faster, but now with less height. Oh, and there's also the wave dash, for when you're in midair, just dash into the ground and then you jump. I know that this might be a bit confusing at first, but just know that there's a bunch of different jump combinations depending on the buttons that you press. So the chapter starts with with a combination of these jumps. Then to move up quickly and gain more height against walls, there is the wall bounce. Basically performing a jump while you are dashing up against a wall or a corner. Again, a mechanic that's used everywhere throughout the run. Now, something interesting that seems like cheating. Remember when I said that your dash only resets when you touch the ground again or pick up one of these crystals? Well, there's this thing called extended super and hyper dashes, where you can get your dash back in mid-air. You basically perform the dash but delay your jump, so that way you stayed on the ground long enough for you to get your dash back before launching yourself back into the air. It's used here, for example, to make it to the platform, and again in a million different places throughout the run. Now this next room shows you just how crazy Celeste speedrunning is gonna get. Normally you just take this route, but instead we can just skip all of it. All this is just a wall bounce off the corner of this thingy. Oh, in the next room, basically same thing. Now here's the first part that I really struggled with while practicing. So instead of taking this normal route, we want to be doing an extended hyper jump, meaning we launch ourselves from here to over there, get our jump back in midair, and then get over these spikes. The major issue is that this platform isn't big enough for us to do an extended one, because remember, we have to stay on the ground long enough for us to get our dash back. So let's welcome the reverse hyper, and just like the name suggests, we start off by dashing to the left into the wall, and then our jump needs to be timed perfectly to the right. So this way we stayed on the ground long enough, still get our hyper momentum in the right direction, plus get the dash back in midair. Honestly, a super hard trick that I spent over half an hour practicing and still could not get consistent. Yet in these speedruns they are performed so effortlessly all the time across the game. Just to put into perspective the skill that these runners have. The next couple rooms should just be done fast, and then one of the most fun parts of the run to me. Again, we are going to skip the traditional path and just fly across the room using a wave dash, giving us back our dash in the air, and we're just feeling like a superhero. Another important note is that during a screen transition, or when you're going from one room to the other, your dash resets and you keep all of your momentum. So very often you will see a hyper dash into the next room and having that speed carry you across. There are some extreme examples of this that we will also see later. Now in this room, instead of just taking a block, which is fairly quick on itself, we can also just wave dash underneath and get on top that way. Another part where we fly across, a wall bounce, and you can kind of see how all of these fundamental techniques start flowing together to navigate these levels quickly. And here is one of those magical parts that feels really good once you get it down. We just jump on these spikes. Well, we actually don't really touch these spikes at all. Here you can see all of the hitboxes. We just barely touch the side of this corner, jump off it, and now we just dash across. Then arriving at the final room, we're gonna deploy neutral jumps. So when you climb a wall in Celeste, you run out of stamina and you drop off. But jumping off a wall without holding the climb button, so just using the jump button, does not affect your stamina. So by pressing the jump button as soon as we touch the wall and stop holding any movement direction, we do a neutral jump, gaining us a little bit of height, and therefore we can basically infinitely climb walls. Again, pretty tricky to learn at first, but a wonderful skill to have. That was chapter 1 in a nutshell, with a lot of different techniques already applied in here. Now keep in mind that this was just a route that I learned, and some runners, especially at higher levels, take slightly different approaches, like going up top here. They also perform a lot more ultras, which I haven't explained yet, but is basically meaning dashing down right or left to gain even more speed, something that I also really struggled with. But with that out of the way and all of these fundamental techniques learned, let's see what chapter 2 has in store for us. The start is nothing fancy. We just take the optimal route to the mirror so we can activate these blocks in the level. Right away, there are some beautiful skips. Here's a room full of spikes. Let's just dash across. Next room, spikes again? No worries, let's just skip it all again. And now we will be exploiting a very interesting mechanic. So whenever you enter a cutscene and then get out of it again, interestingly it will change your X coordinate, so your horizontal positioning, but it will retain your original Y position. So what you can do while entering this mirror cutscene is dash up, skip the cutscene, and it will place you right in this block, saving just a little bit of time. Then we're just making our way over to Evil Madeline and the chase begins. There are a couple of neat skips again, like instead of having to do these 2 dashes through the block, you can actually take a diagonal one, and the same can be done here. Then we unlock these doors as fast as possible, and it's basically just trying to optimize all of the movement, memorizing which jumps to use where. The ending again will just teleport us to the start, and even though this is the easiest part in the story, it is one of the harder parts to get down consistently for speedrunners, since it's just a massive collection of perfectly timed dashes and jumps that is easy to mess up or to forget about. So while dashing across here, don't forget to give the video a like if you're enjoying it so far, and consider subscribing if you're new to the channel and do enjoy this type of content. After chapter 2 we have resorts, and we'll start off by using the screen transition to get to the key quickly. Like I mentioned before, during a screen transition your dash is going to be reset, so if we dash up into the transition we can make our way over to the key and skip the entire parkour part. This level is also when we first meet cycles, which indicates the movement of the dust bunnies. For example, when you enter this room you have to quickly and correctly execute all of these jumps. If you are a bit too slow, you'll be off cycle, meaning a dust bunny might just be somewhere you don't want it to be and you die. Now the issue is that when you die you actually spawn back on a different cycle than if you would enter the room, so you would need a different backup strategy to get across, or just walk out and back into the room to reset the cycle. There's a lot of rooms here in chapter 3 where top runners are so fast that they can even beat a cycle and just perform a completely different strategy, getting ahead of, for example, most of the routes that I learned. Here we encounter another use of the screen transition, both carrying our momentum and resetting our dash so that we can fly underneath here and land on the platform. Another classic extended hyper to skip the entire room and then skip more cutscenes. We are coming up to the most annoying part of the run, getting through the mess. This is just a bunch of stupid precise movement inputs that are really easy to mess up, but after that it's mostly just fast rooms with more wave dashes, supers, hypers, remembering how to perform your cycle, and then getting the mess cleaned up. Another little trick that you can use throughout the entire run is fast falling, just by holding the down button while you are in mid-air to increase your speed slightly. Now we have arrived at a different kind of spike jump, because this time we will actually be touching the spikes. The way spikes work in Celeste is that they only damage you when you fall into them. However, if you move in the same direction that the spikes are pointing towards, they cannot hurt you. This way you're able to travel through spike platforms, but that also means that we can deploy a neat trick here. When jumping up and brushing against this corner, we can press the jump button again, boosting us off this wall, or in this case the spikes, and giving us enough height to dash up and skip everything. This is also the reason that Celeste speedrunners often have 2 different jump buttons. They can press the first one for the initial jump, and while holding that, press the second jump button to execute the spike jump. There are more applications for the double jump buttons, but those will become clear later. And now the part that you're probably all looking forward to. How do you jump through this wall? Welcome to the demo dash. This is basically a dash in the crouched state, so your hitbox becomes slightly smaller. You can even bind a demo dash button in the settings of the game. If you look at the hitboxes of the wall, you can see there's actually a small gap in between the dust bunnies, meaning that with the right height, performing a demo dash gets you cleanly through. This is one of the biggest skips in the game, leaving behind multiple rooms at once. There are of course other more difficult demo dashes in the game that top runners use to save time, but none of them are as significant as this one. Finally, we have arrived at the chase, and this was such an annoying one to learn. At the end you have an incredibly long room with a cycle that you have to catch as well, so you can't mess it up. This is a lot to memorize and execute, and this was also the part where I thought to myself, maybe this challenge of learning to speedrun Celeste is a bit ambitious. Even if you got all of the techniques and the practice in, it will take a while to memorize all of these levels, especially knowing that we are only at chapter 3. The levels will only get longer and more difficult. But I was determined to at least give it a fair try and understand the whole speedrun. And with that mindset, we're headed into the Golden Ridge. The start mainly tests your technical skills. You can still perform supers and hypers of the clouds, and the bubbles can be activated earlier by pressing the dash. And then you have to figure out how to use everything you just learned in the stupid wind, which just completely messes you up. Previously you could hyper through entire rooms, now it's going to get a little bit more interesting. Coming up is this door, which is usually open like this. It is impossible to go diagonal here as a shortcut. Or is it? Well, apparently you can demo dash into this bubble, or in other words, you are crouched, and it will slightly raise the hitbox so you can actually pull off the diagonal dash without hitting the spikes. And that way we once again save just a little bit of time. We will have to perform another one of those spike jumps in order to avoid having to ride this block all the way up. Now keep in mind that these are actually pretty hard to pull off consistently, since you need a specific lineup to just barely touch the corner that you can jump off. And then we can just skip an entire room using some clever wall bounces. Next room, basically skipping it all again using wall bounces. And then we're coming up to something crazy that I cannot even perform. There is luckily a simpler skip which is still pretty difficult, but you basically guide this block through the room, then use the extra momentum that it gives you to extended hyper all the way over to the exit. Meanwhile, the difficult strat skips the block entirely and builds up the momentum, performing a bunch of very specific jumps in quick succession to also fly across. Then a really cool room where the wind actually helps us perform an extended hyper on a cloud. After some more tricky rooms, we are entering the second long room with one of those moving blocks. Again, there is an easy and difficult strat that I simply can't perform. I first activate the block, then I speed ahead to open the door quickly and jump to the end. Meanwhile, the world record run does this thing which I can't even explain. He just finds a pixel perfect way to crouch jump in between these spikes. So that's also possible, I guess. The rest of this level are just more hard rooms with nothing too crazy or new, except for another really long one that you will have to practice quite a bit. And here's a fun fact. After this level, we're actually only done with about 35% of the run, believe it or not. World record pace is sitting at 9 minutes 37 seconds, while the whole run is 26 minutes. Why is that? Well, we'll find out soon enough. Chapter 5 is the Mirror Temple, where we had to fly across in red bubbles. Of course, now that we have this arsenal of jumps, we can just skip using them altogether. Here, for example, you had to go through multiple rooms to just get into a bubble and then fly in between the spikes. Instead, we could just use a reverse hyper to get over here, or a wave dash, whatever suits you. Then we're going to perform one of those cutscene interactions again, dashing up while entering it, so when we skip it, our X position will be reset, but our height stays the same, conveniently putting us right on top of the button to open the door. The next room is probably my favorite. We've kind of discussed how momentum works in Celeste, but you can build up speed, preserve it through transitions, but also add onto it. There is no actual limit to how fast you can go. Remember these blocks that move when we dash? Well, when it's moving and we jump off, we carry that momentum with us. So here we have one that moves to the right after we dash, and by standing on this corner and waiting until the block moves back, we can perform a reverse hyper, dashing left into the wall, then jumping off right, giving us both the speed of the moving block on top of our hyper momentum. This allows us to just fly through the room into a transition all the way across. If you don't really understand what all of this means, just know that speed plus speed equals more speed. Chapter 5 is actually very special because people figured out that getting the cassette, which unlocks the B-side of this level, and playing that harder version instead is actually faster than just playing through the level normally. The B-side also has a collection of incredibly hard shortcuts, starting with one of the biggest skips in the game called the Bubs Drop, a 2-frame perfect strat. So when you go up in this room, you always jump on this platform. But by executing a jump right as you exit the room, you can perform a wall jump, cancelling your momentum, making you miss the platform and actually fall back down into the other room. But why would you want to fall back down? Well, if you then retry, instead of spawning back at the start of this room, you will have set a new save point, which is at the end of this room. You basically teleported to over here by just triggering the next room without actually entering it and being stuck. A clever use of how the save states in the game work. Later down the line, we can again skip the red bubbles to go through the spikes by performing another reverse hyper dash. We will be doing another spike jump because obviously we can't make this level any harder, but we definitely can. I think it's finally time to introduce you to corner boosts. Celeste has a mechanic where if you run into a corner, if If you quickly press the jump button, you will be able to get over it while keeping the momentum. Top runners again perform this all over the run, and it's a major reason why they use 2 jump buttons instead of just 1. Here's an extreme example in the level where you can just fly over all of these corners even with spikes by just mashing the jump buttons. Also in the B side of this level, you will have to enter the mirror and have to deal with even harder versions of the monster rooms, on top of carrying Theo in his cage with some crazy parkour involved. Then we can finally leave this behind us and enter the second to last chapter. Reflection. This is where we learn to fly using the feather and get thrown all the way down again by evil Madeline. Now in the first room where you spawn, there is already a massive skip. The hitboxes of these spikes actually don't reach all the way down, so if you line it up properly, we can actually wall bounce off this corner and skip an entire section again. The upcoming rooms just demand incredible precision with the feather, and just like with the previous chapter, turns out that getting the cassette and playing the B-side is actually faster than completing the level normally. To get to the cassette, we will be abusing the momentum again. We're combining the speed of this Kevin block, moving to the left, with the hyper speed from a reverse hyper that we perform on top of it. Now to maintain this momentum, we just jump right as we enter the room into an ultra, which is again just a down dash into a jump to accelerate even more. And with all of that, we're at the cassette. And when it comes to playing this B-side, there's actually not that many crazy shortcuts or interactions. You are basically navigating through the first part quickly, dancing in between some spike falls. Here again, there is a demo dash that you could perform. And then you have harder versions of the evil Madeline fight. This is a pretty long and precise section, one of the main reasons why the speedrun is still going on for so long. Attempting to learn how to speedrun this is truly pain and suffering. That is mostly it for reflection. Now we are headed towards the final chapter. The summit. Here you have 2 dashes, but the rooms are much harder than before, which sadly restricts us from doing a lot of insane stuff. But we can still use our good friend the wall bounce to skip this part. Here's a cool reverse super on top of this movement of the block, which gets us across. Then a whole lot of rooms that you kind of just have to play as intended. Once we encounter dust bunnies again, there is apparently another demo dash that can be performed into a crazy long room with a cycle that you once again can't really afford to mess up. Oh, did I say one room? There's actually multiple of those. Next up, we can literally just fly up an entire room by doing another wall bounce into it, followed up with another wall bounce. More stupid wind rooms, then a long room with a moving block. And just like before, there is an easy strat and a hard one. So for the first one, you just ride the block again. Perform an extended hyper. Using your 2 dashes, you just barely make it over to this next block. Then a tricky wall bounce of this corner allows you to reach the exit without needing that first moving platform. Now for the difficult strat, we are just ditching this block early, jump on the few safe spots in between the spikes, demo dash in between, and there you go. It's ridiculous. The world record just goes through this next room without even moving any of the blocks. Later down the line, there is another spike jump you can perform to double dash up in between more spikes. Then another very surgical room where you have to wave dash across and try to get through this very small gap. And that's not the only small gap we're getting through. This next room we can skip having to press the buttons for the doors and just demo dash or normal dash underneath, saving a tiny bit of time again. After that, we are finally at the summit with the checkpoints, starting off with a bunch of wall bounces. You have to play most of summit as intended, obviously with very optimized movement. The checkpoints mainly function as a save point for when you die, so some of them will be skipped just to save more time. Another demo dash hidden in plain sight, and then we have arrived at the final checkpoint. This is where Isaac ended his world record run at 26 minutes. And this is definitely not going to be the end of Celeste speedrunning. Now let's answer that question again. Why do I think Celeste is one of the best speedrunning games ever created? I have 3 answers for you. First of all, the game is literally made for it. There's so many techniques that you can learn and master which are intended by the developers and coded into the game. Yet you don't need to learn all of them just to reach the summit, putting the skill floor relatively low but the skill ceiling insanely high. This basically just means that it's beginner friendly for new runners. You can choose the easier routes at first, stick with the basics, and slowly as you improve and want to lower your time, there is a crazy number of new skills that you can learn and master. There's currently 134 runners that have a sub 30-minute run. This is a journey of constant improvement. And just so you all know, there's so many more details on execution and smaller shortcuts or alternate routes that I left out of this video because otherwise we could just keep going. Secondly, it is a beautifully designed game. Not only is the music gorgeous, but the artwork and level design is also stunning. Most of all though, I just love the story in this game. It truly took me on a roller coaster while I was raging at some pretty difficult levels. But also from a quality of life perspective, the game has a lot of mechanics that just make it feel really good to play. You don't get randomly stuck on corners or have your jump just fail on you, which obviously is a huge bonus for speedrunners. Lastly, the community. Again, it's one of the games with the most submitted runs out there and a very active player base. Even though I mostly watch it all from the sidelines without really engaging, without all of the content supplied by the Celeste community, I would have no clue how to get started with the speedrun. A huge shout out to the people on screen for their contributions. Their videos helped me on this journey. And if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you might like some of my other content as well. Thank you for watching.